My parents invited me to a fancy family dinner, but told me to sit at the kids' table while my married siblings sat with the adults. I quietly got up and left. Hours later, they were desperately calling me. Before we begin the story, take a moment to support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support means the world to our channel and helps us spread more shocking true stories to light. Now, let's get started. I knew this Christmas dinner was going to be a disaster the second I stepped through the door. The air was thick with the same tension I had grown up with, the same unspoken judgments wrapped up in holiday cheer. It was always like this, every year. But this time, I told myself it would be different. This year, I wouldn't let them get to me. Oh, right? Let me introduce myself. My name is Leah, and I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. But in this family, being the youngest has never meant being cherished or doted on. No, in my world, it means being dismissed, talked over, and treated like I never quite grew up. I'm 29 now, but to them, I might as well still be a teenager. Unlike my siblings, I don't have a spouse or kids. No little ones running around, no perfect family Christmas card to show off. But I have something else, a life of my own. A career I've built from scratch, real independence, and a small circle of friends who actually respect me. Yet to my family, none of that seems to matter. In their eyes, success is measured in wedding rings and baby carriages, and anything outside that mold, well, it's just a phase I'm supposed to grow out of. Still, every year I go, because that's what you do, right? You show up for family, even when they never really show up for you. The house that never felt like home. Christmas dinner was always a big deal in my family. Not because we were particularly close, but because it was tradition. One of the few times in the year when everyone gathered under one roof, my parents' massive old Victorian house. A house that looked picture perfect in holiday photos, but in reality, it was cold, stiff, unwelcoming, much like my parents themselves. I had always hated that house. The creaky wooden floors, the antique furniture no one was allowed to touch, the way the air inside always felt a little too heavy. It was the kind of place that tried so hard to look warm and inviting, but never actually was. Still, I pulled into the long, winding driveway and took a deep breath. Just get through it, Leah. Smile, nod, and don't let them get under your skin. When I walked inside, the chaos had already begun. My oldest brother, Eric, was there with his wife and their 3 kids, loudly taking over the dining room like they owned the place. His voice boomed through the house as he barked orders about where the chairs should go. Then there was my sister, Melanie, perfectly poised with her husband and their brand new baby, radiating that smug glow of someone who thinks they've won at life. In the kitchen, my parents bustled around, pretending they had everything under control. But really, their only true skill was making everyone feel like they were 5 years old again. I tried to slip in quietly, hoping to avoid the usual interrogation. But of course, my mom spotted me instantly. Her face lit up with that smile, the one that was more habit than happiness, more performance than affection. "Oh, Leah, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into one of those hugs that felt more like an obligation than a welcome. "I'm so glad you could make it." Before I could even respond, my dad's voice boomed from the other room. Authoritative, commanding, like he was still the king of the castle. "Dinner's about ready. Eric, Melanie, get the kids settled." I stood there for a moment, unsure where to go. I wanted to belong, I really did. But deep down, I already knew where this was heading. And I was right, because the next words out of my mother's mouth were the ones that shattered any last illusion I had. "Leah, why don't you sit at the kids' table?" The ultimate insult. I froze. At first, I thought I must have misheard her. The kids' table? I blinked, trying to process what she had just said. But the look on her face, the sweet, saccharine smile, the overly pleasant tone, it was intentional. She knew exactly what she was doing. I glanced toward the main dining table, the adult table. Crystal wine glasses, fancy china, candles flickering elegantly across a table set for people who apparently belonged. My dad sat at the head, looking proud, smug even, while my married siblings filled the seats beside him. There was no space for me. Not even an empty chair. I turned back to my mom, searching her face for some sign that maybe this was a joke. Maybe she didn't mean to humiliate me like this. But she just kept smiling, so perfectly put together, so oblivious to the sting of what she just said. "Oh, we set up a special spot for you over there, honey," she continued, motioning toward the far end of the room. "With the cousins." I followed her gaze. There it was, the kids' table. A mismatched collection of folding chairs, paper plates, and juice boxes. The same setup they used every year for the younger children. I swallowed hard. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me as an equal, an adult, someone worthy of sitting at the same table as them. But no, this wasn't about seating arrangements. This was about how they saw me, how they'd always seen me, as less than, as the little sister who never quite measured up. I forced a smile, even though my stomach twisted with humiliation. "Sure, Mom. Thanks," I said, my voice barely steady. She beamed like she had done me a favor. I turned on my heel and walked toward the kids' table, every step heavier than the last. They really didn't see me, and maybe they never would. The breaking point. I sat down. The chair wobbled beneath me, a flimsy plastic thing clearly not meant for an adult. The table itself was covered in a cheap holiday-themed tablecloth, decorated with crayon scribbles from my younger cousins. Around me, toddlers shoved mashed potatoes into their mouths, while the older kids ignored me completely, lost in their own little world. I stared at my plate. Sloppy, uneven portions of food thrown together like an afterthought. A plastic fork. A paper cup. Not even a real plate, like the one set out at the adult table. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening with something between anger and humiliation. They didn't even try to hide it this time. This wasn't about seating. This was about putting me in my place. I clenched my hands into fists under the table. The conversation at the adult table carried on, laughter and clinking glasses filling the air as my siblings talked about their perfect lives. My dad was already deep in some long-winded speech about family values, my mom nodding along, basking in the image of her successful, accomplished children. All except me. I was nothing more than a footnote, an extra, a kid in their eyes. A piece of broccoli tumbled off one of my cousin's plates, landing on the floor next to my chair. I stared at it, my chest tightening with a mix of rage and something else, something that felt an awful lot like heartbreak. And that was it. I was done. Slowly, carefully I stood up. I didn't make a scene, didn't slam my chair back or throw a fit. I just left. I grabbed my coat, slung it over my shoulder, and walked toward the door. The conversations behind me continued, uninterrupted, until my mom's voice finally cut through the noise. "Leah," she called, confusion laced in her tone. "Where are you going?" I didn't look back. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Enjoy your dinner." And with that, I stepped out into the cold night air. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling the sound of their frantic voices. For the first time in my life, I walked away from them. And I wasn't turning back, driving into the unknown. The cold night air hit me like a slap, sharp and biting, but I barely felt it. I walked down the driveway, my boots crunching against the thin layer of snow, my breath coming out in uneven clouds. Behind me, the muffled sounds of my family's voices spilled out from the house, my name being called, the rising tension in my mother's tone. But I didn't stop. I climbed into my car, slamming the door shut behind me, sealing myself off from them. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, though whether from anger or something else, I wasn't sure. For a moment, I just sat there, heart pounding, mind racing. I had just walked out of Christmas dinner, walked out on my family, on the perfect little illusion they had worked so hard to maintain. Good. I started the car. The engine rumbled to life, the heat blasting against my frozen fingers as I pulled out of the driveway. Headlights cut through the darkness as I turned onto the empty road, leaving that towering Victorian house and everything it represented behind me. I had no idea where I was going. I just drove. Streetlights blurred past in streaks of white and gold. The radio hummed softly in the background, some slow Christmas song playing, but I barely heard it. My mind replayed the evening over and over, each moment pressing deeper into my chest. The fake smiles, the dismissive comments, the paper plate. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. All I had wanted, All I had ever wanted was to be seen, to be treated like I mattered, like I belonged. But tonight made one thing painfully clear. I never had, and maybe I never would. A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down. No, I wasn't going to cry over them. Not tonight. After what felt like hours, I spotted a neon sign glowing in the distance. A diner. Small, quiet, open late. Without thinking, I pulled into the parking lot. The tires crunched against the icy pavement as I eased the car into a space, my breath slowing for the first time since I left the house. Maybe I just needed a minute. Just 1 minute to sit in the warm glow of a place where no one knew me, where no one saw me as a failure. I killed the engine, grabbed my phone, and stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled softly as I entered, the smell of fresh coffee and grilled food wrapping around me like a blanket. For the first time all night, I exhaled. And then my phone started buzzing. The messages start pouring in. I slid into a booth near the window, the cracked vinyl seat cool against my legs. A waitress passed by, offering a polite smile as she placed a menu in front of me, but I barely looked at it. Because my phone, my silent witness to the entire night, was now vibrating relentlessly against the table. I sighed, already knowing what I'd see before I even picked it up. Missed calls, texts, a flood of frantic messages from my family, one after another. The first was from Eric. Leah, this isn't funny. Where the hell are you? Then Melanie. Mom is freaking out. We just wanted to come back. Can you stop being dramatic for once? I scoffed, tossing my phone onto the table. Dramatic. That was always their word for me, wasn't it? Not hurt, not upset, not tired of being treated like I didn't belong. Just dramatic. I stared out the diner window, watching as snowflakes drifted lazily under the glow of a street lamp. Inside, the world was warm, still quiet. But on my phone, chaos. Another text came through, this time from my dad. Come on, Leah. Don't act like a child. Get back here. A bitter laugh slipped from my lips. A child, right? Because walking out after being literally seated at the kids' table was childish. I rubbed my temples, trying to ease the dull ache forming behind my eyes. The waitress returned, a warm cup of coffee in her hand. She set it down gently, offering a small, knowing smile before walking away. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth sink into my fingers. And then, one more message. This time from my mom. Leah, where are you? We need to talk. This isn't funny. I stared at it, feeling something shift inside me. I wasn't playing a game. I wasn't throwing a tantrum. I was done being invisible. And for once, they didn't know what to do about it. The ball was in my court now. I let my phone buzz on the table, the vibrations rattling against the cheap laminate surface. I didn't pick it up. For once, they could sit there in their panic, wondering what I was thinking, what I was feeling. Because tonight, I wasn't rushing to explain myself. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth spread through me, grounding me. The diner was quiet, just a few late-night customers, the low hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware. A stark contrast to the chaos happening in my family group chat. I finally glanced at my phone again. More messages, more demands, more of them trying to control the situation the way they always had. Eric, Leah, don't be ridiculous. You're overreacting. Melanie, seriously? You just left? You embarrassed Mom in front of everyone. Dad, enough of this nonsense. Get back here now. And then, the one that made my stomach twist the hardest from my mom. I don't understand why you're doing this. Your siblings are worried. You're ruining Christmas. Don't make this about you, Leah. You're being selfish. I set my coffee down a little too hard. Selfish. There it was. The word they always used when I didn't fall in line. I could feel my pulse in my ears, the familiar sting of resentment bubbling up. I had spent years making myself smaller for them, biting my tongue, swallowing my feelings, playing the role of the quiet, agreeable youngest sibling just to keep the peace. And yet, the one time I stood up for myself, I was the problem. I inhaled deeply through my nose, trying to steady the storm inside me. Then, without hesitating, I pressed block on my mother's number. A sharp, deliberate movement, one that felt liberating. I wasn't letting her twist this into something it wasn't. Not this time. I took another sip of coffee, feeling a smirk tug at the corner of my lips. They had no idea what was coming. Could them listen? I sat there for a while, staring at my phone. The messages kept coming, but now, without my mother's guilt-tripping text in the mix, the rest just felt desperate. Eric, Melanie, even my dad, the man who never admitted he was wrong. All of them scrambling to pull me back into their world. I could have ignored them. I could have let them sit in their own discomfort, wondering if I would ever speak to them again. But that would have been too easy. No, they needed to hear me. I opened a family group chat and let my fingers hover over the keyboard. For a second, I considered sugarcoating it, making it palatable for them. But then I realized, why should I? They'd spent years talking at me, dismissing me, belittling me. Now, they were going to listen. I started typing. You really don't get it, do you? You think this is about a seat at the table? It's not. It never was. It's about the way you've treated me my entire life. Like I don't matter. Like I'm invisible unless it's convenient for you. I paused, my heart pounding, then kept going. I've worked hard to build a life for myself. I have a career, friends, independence, things I'm proud of. But none of that has ever been enough for you, has it? Because I don't fit into your perfect little mold. Because I don't have a husband and kids to parade around like a trophy. I took a breath, my chest tight, my fingers moving faster now. You talk down to me. You dismiss me. You seat me at a literal kid's table to remind me that in your eyes, I'll never be an equal. And you know what? I'm done pretending that's okay. The diner was silent around me. The only sound was the soft clinking of dishes from the kitchen, the distant murmur of late-night conversations. I could almost hear my family's reaction in my head. The stunned silence, the indignant anger, the immediate scrambling to paint me as the villain. And for once, I didn't care. I hit send. The moment the message went through, my phone exploded with notifications. I didn't even bother opening them. Instead, I leaned back in my seat, lifted my coffee to my lips, and took a slow, satisfied sip. For the first time in my life, I had said exactly what I needed to say. And I wasn't sorry for it. The fallout begins. I set my phone down and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The screen lit up with one notification after another. Texts, missed calls, desperate attempts to pull me back into their version of reality. I ignored them at first, sipping my coffee as if this wasn't the biggest stand I had ever taken in my life. But curiosity won in the end. I glanced at the screen, and just as I expected, the messages were a mess of denial, anger, and guilt-tripping. Eric, Leah, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion. Melanie, this is ridiculous. We didn't mean it like that. Stop making everything about you. Dad, enough. You made your point. Now act like an adult and come back. I scoffed. Act like an adult? That's all I had ever wanted, to be treated like one. But apparently, standing up for myself was proof that I was still a child in their eyes. And then came the one I had been expecting. A message from my mom. It was longer than the others. Carefully worded, laced with that same calmly manipulative tone she always used when she wanted me to feel guilty. Mom, Leah, I don't know why you're doing this. Your siblings are hurt. We are family. We're supposed to stick together. Christmas is supposed to be about love and togetherness, but instead, you've chosen to isolate yourself. This isn't the daughter I raised. Please, come back before this gets worse. There it was. The final attempt to spin the story. I was the one causing the problem. I was the one choosing to isolate myself. Not them. Never them. A part of me wanted to fire back with everything I had. To lay out every single time they had belittled me, dismissed me, made me feel like I didn't belong. But I had already said enough. They weren't listening. They never had. Instead of responding, I did something I never thought I'd do. I left the group chat. The second I hit leave, a strange, unexpected peace settled over me. For the first time in years, their voices weren't in my head anymore. I looked out the diner window, watching the snow swirl under the streetlights. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in my life, I was in control. And that was enough. The silence felt different. The moment I left the family group chat, the world felt quieter. Not the kind of quiet that was lonely, the kind of quiet that felt like freedom. I stared at my phone for a moment, half expecting it to light up again. A call, a last-ditch effort. But for the first time all night, nothing came. No more buzzing. No more frantic attempts to control the narrative. Just silence. And that silence? It was mine. I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. This was what I had been afraid of, wasn't it? That if I ever really stood up for myself, if I ever truly stopped playing their game, I'd be left with nothing. No more family group texts. No more invitations I half-heartedly accepted out of obligation. No more pretending that their approval mattered to me. But instead of feeling empty, I felt weightless. Like I had finally set something down after carrying it for far too long. The waitress passed by, pausing when she saw the look on my face. "You okay, hun?" she asked, her voice kind but cautious. I blinked, realizing I had been staring at nothing. Then I smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Yeah," I said, stirring the last bit of coffee in my mug. "I think I am. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. What comes next?" I sat there for a long time, staring into my coffee cup as the reality of what I had just done settled over me. I had walked away, not just from Christmas dinner, not just from the humiliation of the kids' table, but from all of it, from the years of dismissal, from the way they had always made me feel small, from the constant need to prove my worth to a family that refused to see it. And now, there was no going back. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had I overreacted? Had I made things worse? Would they ever really understand why I had done this? But then I reminded myself of something that had taken me years to realize. Standing up for yourself will always feel wrong when you've been conditioned to stay silent. And I had stayed silent long enough. My phone was still on the table, screen dark, completely still. No more messages. No more calls. I was completely, undeniably on my own. And yet for the first time in my life, that didn't scare me. I waved down the waitress, pulling my wallet from my bag. "Could I get a slice of pie to go?" I asked. She grinned. "Rough night." I let out a soft laugh. "Something like that." She nodded like she understood. Like maybe she had been here before, sitting in a small-town diner late at night, figuring out how to rewrite her own story. A few minutes later, she handed me a white paper bag, the warmth of the pie seeping through. "On the house," she said with a wink. I didn't argue. I stepped out into the cold, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The world felt different, lighter, quieter, like I had stepped into a version of my life that had been waiting for me all along. I climbed into my car, setting the bag on the passenger seat. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I was driving away from something. I was driving towards something new, and whatever it was mine.